Okay, so let's get into it with another video. And we're going to look at 1920s America, and specifically America and the Red Scare. Straight away, I'm going to give you a little bit of a trip hazard, a trip warning. Do not confuse the 1920s Red Scare with the 1950s when we see America fearing communism and Joe McCarthy and the McCarthy witch trials and things like that. So don't confuse the two. We are purely focusing today on 1920s America and the Red Scare. Okay? 1920s, not 1950s. Make sure you are clear on that before we go anywhere else. Now, there are two key terms that you're going to need to know today. And again, as always, what I would suggest to you is pause the video, write these down, make sure you're clear on these, but I'm going to read through them as well. The first one is communism, and it's a system where the government owns all of the lands, the businesses, the resources, and everyone shares them equally. The idea is that no one's richer or poorer than anyone else, and everyone works together for the good, the whole of the community. Now, communism is pretty much a direct opposite to capitalism, which is very much the American way of doing things. So you can see straight away that you're going to have a clash of ideologies here. Communism and then capitalism. Communism coming from the 1917 Russian Revolution, capitalism being the American dream type of thing. The other definition you need to be clear about is what an anarchist is, an anarchy. And an anarchist is someone who believes there should be no government or leaders because they think everyone should be free to make their own rules and decisions without being controlled by a government. So they're the two key definitions that I need you to know, and then we'll look at how we're going to explore the Red Scare in 1920s America. And I'm going to break it down into 5 key areas. So if you're making a mind map, you know you're going to have 5 strands coming off that mind map, or if you're making bullet points, 5 subheadings, or if we're doing flashcards, 5 flashcards, you get the idea. But I'm showing you how you're going to be breaking down your notes as you're following this video along. You might want to pause it now, get yourself ready, and then we'll carry on. So that first one's going to be the fear of communism and radical ideologies. Radical, it means a new thing, something that's not been seen before. And Americans were worried about the spread of communism after the Russian Revolution of 1917. Many feared that labour strikes and worker movements in America were signs of this growing communist uprising. They were wrong, they were not signs of a communist uprising, but many connected this idea of workers wanting more rights, workers wanting more pay, to the growing of communism in the Russia, which later became the Soviet Union. So make sure you recognise that one first. It's a fear of communism and radical ideologies. Moving on, we've got labour unrest. Talked about that briefly when we were looking at the last slide. And in 1919, the United States experienced a wave of strikes. We saw police officers going on strikes, steel workers going on strikes. There was a general strike where you've seen hundreds of thousands of workers stopping work. And these labour movements were often associated with the radical ideologies which I talked about previously, even though most of the strikers were not communist. So we've now got 2 aspects of the Red Scare. We've got this fear of communism and we've now got labour unrest. Let's just move on again now. And now let's bring the anarchists into play as we're looking at this. And we started seeing bomb scares and anarchist activities. And there were several high-profile bombings. Bomb detonated on Wall Street, which killed dozens of people. And people were really beginning to fear that anarchists were trying to take control, were trying to destabilise the government. And we saw these events starting to heighten this fear of domestic terrorism and other radical plots. So we've now covered 3 things. We've covered the fear of communism, we've covered labour unrest, and now we've looked at bomb scares and anarchist activities. So in response to this, we're now going to look at government crackdowns. And the key person we need to know about here is the Attorney General, Mitchell Palmer. The Attorney General essentially is the chief lawyer. He's the lawyer who will advise the President, and therefore is a really, really significant and important person. And the government responded with what can be described simply as aggressive measures. The Attorney General, he led what was described as the Palmer raids, during which thousands of suspected radicals were arrested without any proper evidence. Many of these were completely innocent of any crime at all. And it was mainly focusing on immigrants who were then deported under suspicion of being involved in these subversive activities. But by subversive activities, we're also including being involved in strikes, being involved in labour disputes and things like that. So these Palmer raids were very, very aggressive. So we've seen 4 parts of the Red Scare, and the final thing I want to look at are what are the effects of the Red Scare then. And the effects can be broken down into 3 key areas. The first one, the Palmer raids, clearly lead to a suppression of civil liberties. People are arrested without warrants, people are denied their right of free speech, and the right of assembly is also limited. So our first effect of the Red Scare is a suppression of civil liberties. Second effect is this idea of increased xenophobia, this fear of people from outside your own country. So immigrants, especially those from Eastern Europe, started to face increased discrimination and increased hostility. And we'll look at an example in another video when we look at the case of Sacco and Vanzetti later on. And then finally, there's a distrust in labour movements. Strikes and unions are viewed with suspicion, and labour activism declines as a result of this. So we've got 3 key effects of the Red Scare now. First one, suppression of civil liberties. Second one, increased xenophobia, so we're seeing discrimination, hostility against immigrants. And finally, distrust in labour movements, and so we see union membership start to decline. So, how are we going to bring all this together in an exam type question? Again, we're looking at an AQA type of question, and here I've got what would be question 4 on the exam paper, and it's in what ways did the Red Scare of the 1920s change the lives of Americans? It would be an 8-mark question, so for 8 marks, we need to be writing 2 paragraphs. You've got 10 minutes to do that. And I think it's really important here that we focus on this. First of all, what it's asking about the Red Scare, so we've got to be writing about that. And it's asking you about change. How did it change the lives of Americans? Therefore, you need to be including what was life like before. There were lots of people joining unions. People were happy to take part in strikes. What changed? Following the Red Scare, less people joined unions. There was less labour unrest. How could we look at that in different areas? Okay, so that's the Red Scare, very briefly covered in just over 8 minutes. Hope you've made some notes. Good luck in your exam.